This is a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to bring some evidence-based nutrition information to everybody. Seems like it's kind of the hot topic that everybody's hungry to learn more about. So the puns will be coming, so get yourself strapped in for that. And so I'm going to start out by just talking a little bit. We'll introduce you to the program, and then I'm going to start right in talking about kind of some background information about evidence-based nutrition, just so that we can all be sort of on the same page about where we're getting our information from. So this first lecture is going to be what to eat. So we're going to be learning about the dietary guidelines for Americans. Can I see a show of hands for who knows or has heard about the dietary guidelines for Americans? I'm not going to ask you to recite them. Okay, good, that's wonderful. About half of you all. And then we're going to identify key recommendations that help to provide further guidance on healthy eating across the lifespan. And we're going to get into specifics about different food groups and how many servings from food groups. And we're also going to have food. So we're going to have some samples of recipes for you all to try towards the end. We've got a couple activities to do in between. And if you feel like you need to get up because we haven't said get up yet, then please feel free to just get up and stand against the wall if you need to stretch your legs or anything like that. Okay, and this is us. So today we're going to be talking about the dietary guidelines for Americans. We're also going to look at patterns, dietary patterns, so healthy dietary patterns and what that means. We'll be looking at specific recommendations through breaking the food groups down. We're also going to do a couple activities in the food demo. We'll have time for questions at the end. So the dietary guidelines for Americans. Basically, the dietary guidelines for Americans are a set of guidelines. They're really written for health professionals to help inform different nutrition education programs for the public and for school systems and that sort of thing. But the dietary guidelines for Americans gives us a set of really basic guidelines to give us kind of a framework about what are healthy eating patterns, what are the different food groups, what kinds of foods should we be trying to choose more of, what foods should we be trying to choose less of. And this all comes out of research. And so when the dietary guidelines were first published in 1980, they were a pretty short set of guidelines. And so as the years have gone by, there's been more scientific evidence that's been added to the body of research. And every 5 years, they're mandated to be published every 5 years and updated. So every 5 years, we get a whole new set of science that's been happening over the past 5 years. And so there's an advisory board that's appointed that comprise of 20 health professionals across all different disciplines across the United States. So there's people from Harvard, there's doctors from Stanford, there's dietitians from the Cleveland Clinic. There are people from all across the United States who get together and they read research. Is there anyone in the room, by chance, because this stuff gets me really excited, but is there anyone else in the room who really loves to read research? Dr. Faraci? So these folks, these health professionals, get together for about a year before the dietary guidelines even are thought of. They get together, they look through all of the evidence that they can find to answer certain questions that have been proposed to them by the USDA. And once they've researched everything and looked through all of the evidence and decided what evidence is good and what evidence is no good, then they submit some recommendations to the USDA and the Health and Human Services. And those two organizations are the ones that actually publish the dietary guidelines for Americans. So it's a pretty rigorous, detailed process that happens, and a lot of hands are involved. A lot of experts in their fields are involved. And really the goal is it's mandated by law to be grounded in the body of scientific and medical knowledge that's available at the time. So, for example, this most recent iteration is from 2020. So, of course, there's been research that's been published since 2020. So, in 2025, when they release those guidelines, they'll incorporate all the stuff that's happened between 2020 and 2025. So this is based on the best evidence that we have, the preponderance of evidence that we have at the time. Okay, and one thing that's really important to remember about the dietary guidelines is that they're focused on health promotion and not on disease treatment. So if you know, somebody's got cardiovascular disease, or they have diabetes, or you know, any other kind of diet and food-related illness, then these dietary guidelines serve as a basis of a good place to start. But then a person might want to seek out further nutrition guidance from a registered dietitian to be able to figure out, okay, well, how do I modify the dietary guidelines to meet my needs with this particular condition? I don't want to date myself too much, but I actually remember getting a bookmark just like this, Nutrition in Your Health, Dietary Guidelines for Americans, when I was in grade school. So things have changed a lot over the years, and the messaging on how we communicate the dietary guidelines for Americans has also changed. So initially, it just started out as a bunch of dietary guidelines, and they were really, you know, more towards policymakers and health professionals. And as we move through the different phases, now we're starting to see things that maybe we're a little more familiar with or recognize. And this is where some of the outreach and public education started happening, where, you know, it was realized that people aren't going to read scientific reports. Well, some people are. Some people are, but the general public, in order to get the messaging out to the general population, we need to have things that are easy to understand, something that's eye-catching, something that shows, you know, the intention of what they're trying to put across to us in an easy-to-see way. So we had the Food Guide Pyramid that was released in 1992 with the base of the grains, and then the vegetables and fruits, and then all the way up at the top was the fats, oils, and sweets. So that's kind of showing you that, okay, well, the base of your diet should be starchy foods, and then, you know, on up the small portion of the fats, oils, and sweets. Then in 2005, we moved to the My Pyramid food guidance system as a way that would maybe be a little bit easier to understand, and they incorporated physical activity in this pyramid as well, so that we recognize that not only what you put into your body, but the way that you use your body are important aspects of keeping yourself healthy. Then we moved to My Plate, and the idea between My Plate, or the idea about My Plate, was that this was going to be a good way for people to be able to visualize when you sit down to eat and you have a plate in front of you. This is a good way to visualize kind of what, quote unquote, should be on your plate. So if you're shooting for half of your plate to be fruits and vegetables, and then a quarter grains and a quarter protein with some kind of dairy on the side. Doesn't have to be cow's dairy. It could be soy milk, fortified soy milk, or lactose-free dairy. That gives us, I think, a more practical way of looking at our food and what is on our plate. And I think it's a good way to get the messaging out there about what food groups we should be trying to incorporate in each of our meals. It does get a little tricky if you're eating something like lasagna, or you're eating, you know, American chop suey or something like that, because those are mixed dishes and it doesn't quite fit this. But you can sort of pull apart those mixed dishes, and you can think, okay, well, that food is mostly grain, or that food is mostly vegetables, and you can still use this as a guideline. And then these are just the different icons to help identify the different food groups. So fruits, vegetables, grains, oils, dairy, protein, and activity. It's really not different than the food groups that we are familiar with over the past several decades, but it is different in the way that it's presented. So now we're going to get into why they're important. So the dietary guidelines for Americans are important for us because they can help us make better food choices to help promote health and prevent disease and reduce the risk of diet-related diseases. And we know from looking at survey data that 6 in 10 adults are living with 1 or more diet-related disease. So that's 60%. We know that dietary patterns impact our overall health. So we know that by increasing our consumption of foods that have a high nutritional value, or what we refer to in the biz as nutrient-dense foods, those foods, coupled with decreasing our intake of foods that have a low nutritional density or have limited added sugars and limited added fat and salt, those two things, these potential health benefits are pretty significant. So a lower all-cause mortality risk, lower risk of heart attack and stroke, lower risk of type 2 diabetes, lower risk of hip fracture, lower risk of certain kinds of cancers, especially breast and colon cancer. So all of those potential health benefits can be attained through making healthier choices and having a healthier dietary pattern. Okay, have I convinced you yet? Okay. So this is some really interesting data that's probably going to make your eyes cross if you're sitting too far back in the room. But mainly, looking at the line that goes across the middle, that's the goal line. All of the blue stuff that's below the line is not enough. All the stuff that's above the line is too much. So total vegetables is the first. Yeah, Lexi's going to point for me. So total vegetables, not enough.
Then this is the subgroup.
And then there's subgroups of the different kinds of vegetables.
We'll get into that.
Dark green vegetables. Yeah, Lexi's going to cover all of that. And then fruits, not enough. Total grains. Well, we eat too much of the refined grains, but not enough of the whole grains.
This is the refined grains. This is refined grains.
Yep.
This is whole grains. This is grains in total.
Grains in total, yeah. And then looking at dairy, we don't consume enough dairy. And I know that there's a lot of folks who are lactose intolerant, so dairy is, not achievable for some people, but there are dairy alternatives, and Lexi will be talking about that. And we did also include a handout in your packet that has a list of different kinds of foods that are good sources of calcium that may or may not come from animal products or may come from plants. And then our total protein foods, we're doing,
this is meat.
Not so great with the meats. So we're eating too much of the meats, chicken meats and eggs. We're not eating enough of the seafoods and not enough of the nuts, seeds, and soy products. So that's all where, part of where the dietary guidelines actually come from is by looking at this kind of data and and the scientists who look at this data then can say, okay, well then if we're not consuming enough of these foods, then this is going to be part of our recommendation, is to consume more of that. So we can also look at how well we as Americans adhere to or follow the dietary guidelines for Americans. And one of the ways that we can do that is by applying what's called the Healthy Eating Index. And so the Healthy Eating Index, it basically measures how closely our choices of foods and beverages match up with the dietary guidelines and recommendations. This is 2015 scores, and at that time, the highest score that you can get is 100. And at the time in 2015, then these different age groups, so ages 2 to 4 is that one far on the left, they did pretty well. 61 was their Healthy Eating Index, but I don't know a lot of 2 to 4-year-olds who are buying their own groceries and making their own food, so that's probably the effort of the caregivers that are making sure that that age group is eating healthy. 5 to 8, it drops a little bit. 9 to 13, and that next age group, that's our teenagers. They're at the lowest points. I have 2 of them at home, so I can attest to this as being true, even though I'm a dietitian. It's crazy. And then as you go older, as you get into the older age groups up to the ages 60 plus, the Healthy Eating Index scores are higher again. but it still, shows some room for improvement, right? So 60%, or a score of 60 out of 100 is okay, but if you were going to get a grade on that, I mean, that'd probably be an F, right? So, all right, so looking at the dietary guidelines, there are 4 basic guidelines. Following a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage is the first one. And then customizing and enjoying nutrient-dense food and beverage choices, taking into account your personal preferences, any cultural needs or considerations, any religious needs potentially, budgetary considerations, all of those things can be considered when we're customizing the dietary guidelines to fit us individually and personally. We also need to focus on meeting our food group needs with nutrient-dense foods and beverages. Does anyone want me to talk a little bit about what a nutrient-dense food is?
Sure.
Okay. So a nutrient-dense food is basically a food that has a high nutritional value for the amount of calories that it has. And so, I mean, we're thinking about things like potato chips versus a baked potato. So, or even sweet potato, yes. So we're thinking about, it's in a lot of cases, it's ultra-processed foods or processed foods as compared to their whole and natural counterparts. The whole natural counterparts will have a higher nutritional value because as they get processed, a lot of those nutrients get taken out of the food or they're leached out because they've been boiled or fried or whatever's happened, and you're left with a lower nutritional value food at the end of the process. So essentially, it's processed foods versus whole, naturally occurring foods. Now, that's not to say that it's not a good idea to eat processed foods, but just keeping in mind that some processed foods, especially the ones that have the added sugars and sodium and fat, those can really have a low nutrient density or a high energy density. And then the 4th guideline is to limit foods and beverages that are higher in added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium, and to limit alcoholic beverages. So those are the basic 4 guidelines. And we're getting ready to do a little movement, so hold on. We're going to talk about a dietary pattern. A pattern of your eating, it's basically just represents the total how you typically eat in a day, or in a week, actually, over the course of time. The parts of your pattern will act synergistically to affect health, so we can't really talk about nutrition in a vacuum. We don't tend to talk about specific foods unless you have an allergy to a food or you need to avoid a certain kind of a nutrient, because there's this synergistic effect that foods have with each other when you consume them that allows them to potentially give you a higher nutritional value or potentially give you a higher satisfaction or satiety value. And then your dietary pattern may also better predict your overall health status and disease risk than looking at individual foods or individual nutrients for that matter. So the key principles, we're going to try to meet our nutritional needs primarily from foods and beverages. We're going to choose a variety of different foods from each of the food groups. We're going to pay attention to our portion sizes. We're going to make half of our plate fruits and vegetables. We're going to focus on whole fresh fruits, making half of our whole grains or half of our grains whole. We're going to vary our protein routine, move to low-fat or fat-free dairy options. And then we're going to choose options for our meals, beverages, and snacks that have a lower added sugar, added sodium, added fat content. And then we're going to include movement and exercise. It's so easy. One of my coworkers told me once, there's just nothing sexy about good nutrition. There really isn't. It's kind of boring. But it's simple, so that's good. Customizing your dietary pattern, this is important to keep in mind if you are working on a budget or if you have certain religious or cultural preferences that need to be considered. If you look at these 4 different foods that we have up here, you could make a million different things with those 4 ingredients. Does anybody have a suggestion of what they might make with these 4 ingredients? A salad. Yeah. A stir fry, sure. A soup, good one.
Burrito.
Yeah, a burrito. Yeah, so you can see you can really do a lot of different things with these basic ingredients to meet cultural considerations, budgetary considerations, and personal preferences. What we would like you to do is to draw. You don't have to draw if you don't want to. You could just write words to fill that plate with a meal that you might normally eat.
That would
Nobody's testing you. Yes.
anything.
Any meal.
Yeah.
Your choice.
Pick any meal where you can meet these dietary guidelines. It is a 9-inch plate is what is typically the recommendation.
Yeah, this is a smaller plate than what you would have at home.
Yeah.
Not actual size. Okay, I'm starting to see a lot of eyes looking back up again. So just tuck that in there. Well, you don't have to tuck it because it's spiral bound, right? So just keep that for later. And we're going to learn some more stuff now. Specific dietary recommendations by age. So this is where we're going to again cross our eyes with this small font and small print. But all of the information that we're reviewing today, you can find on the Dietary Guidelines for Americans website. So it's dietaryguidelines.gov, correct? Yep. And so you can go there if you want to find out. There's a personalized, not a tracker. I think there is actually a tracker too. Yeah.
Well,
I think so.
it's the app.
The app. Okay, the app is, okay, because it used to be online.
You can do it online too.
Yeah.
Well, that's at myplate.gov.
So there's a spot on myplate.gov where you can enter in your information and it will tell you how many servings from each of the food groups that you should be shooting for. So if you wanted to look into something like that, then we're going to be giving you all of the information for how to find these resources towards the end of class. Just to make sure that we're clear on how the dietary guidelines get translated into MyPlate. Basically, MyPlate is the educational tool that's used to get to consumers and to the general public to communicate what the dietary guidelines are wanting your plate to look like in order to improve your health, reduce your risk of disease. This is expected at each meal. And yes, I mean, a lot of people probably don't eat vegetables for breakfast, but why not? I mean, maybe you could. You know, sometimes I put pumpkin in my oatmeal, or sometimes I put a bunch of chopped vegetables in my eggs. So it could be a way to expand your choices and to think of some different and creative ways to make some meals that are within the dietary guideline recommendations that look like that MyPlate, that reflect MyPlate. And maybe it's a little bit different than what you would normally eat, but maybe that's a good thing. So these are patterns for adults ages 19 to 59. And so the recommendation is to shoot for 2 to 4 cups of vegetables a day, 1.5 to 2.5 cups of fruit per day. And I think maybe you can already see why Americans don't meet these recommendations. I mean, this is not typical dietary pattern, I think, for many people, or at least for the people that I talk to. It's not a typical dietary pattern. Grains, 5 to 10 ounces per day. We probably meet that, but with refined grains. I don't think we're meeting, well, obviously, the data showed that we don't meet our whole grain recommendations. Dairy, 3 cups per day. Protein, 5 to 7 ounces per day, and oils, 2.5 to 5 teaspoons per day. So those are the recommendations and the ranges for ages 19 through 59. And the reason that there's a range is because there's different calorie needs. So if you were to go on the website and look at this chart, you'll see that there's different calorie levels up at the top, and under each calorie level is the number of servings that are recommended. So the lower end is for 1,600 calories, the higher end is for up to 3,000 calories. And then for adults that are age 60 and older, it's pretty much the same. It's a little bit different, a little bit less overall. Vegetables, 2 to 3.5 cups per day. Fruits, 1.5 to 2 cups per day. Grains, 5 to 9 ounces per day. Dairy is the same at 3 cups per day. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet that Lexi's probably going to talk about is the reason why we recommend different numbers of servings from different food groups is to meet micro and macronutrient recommendations. So basically vitamins and minerals, there's a certain amount of vitamins and minerals and a certain amount of carbohydrates, fat, and protein that you need every day. And so looking at the evidence that's out there and then looking at our dietary patterns, looking at the things that, the diet-related conditions, looking at the potential for nutrient deficiencies, which is where this all originated from, was preventing nutrient deficiencies. Then we know that by recommending these amounts of the different food groups, this is how we can meet our nutrient needs. So this is how we can meet our vitamin mineral needs, our calorie needs, our protein needs, our fat needs, and our carbohydrate needs. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Lexi.
Okay, thank you, Lori. So I am just going to get set up here. My name's Lexi Youngbluth. My full name's Alexandra. And yeah, we're going to talk more specifics here. So specifically with fruits. The recommendation, as Lori mentioned, is 1.5 to 2.5 cups of fruit a day. Fruit can include 100% fruit juice, but only half of your daily intake should be made up of 100% juice. And then the other can be from whole fruit, which includes fresh, canned, frozen, and dried forms. And juice should be 100% pasteurized without added sugars. And I said that recommended, no more than 1 of the juice. And then when you're selecting like canned or like those plastic cups of fruit, you want to choose ones that are packed in water, not having added sugars to those. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about are those specifics. But in lecture 3, we're going to really get into how to read a nutrition label, how to kind of like interpret some of this information for your own dietary pattern, how you choose. But as we mentioned, about 80% of Americans do not meet the fruit recommendations. And maybe this is an area you want to look at. And we're not expecting everybody to leave here and follow the dietary guidelines perfectly. That's very difficult to do. But really what could be helpful is if you look at maybe a few of these things that you could add to your diet to help your diet. And no guilt or shame with some of the choices that you make, but really just adding more of these nutrient-dense foods that we're talking about. So vegetables. A healthy dietary pattern includes a variety of vegetables. So that's from all of the 5 subgroups. And in a school nutrition program, for example, a school is required to serve a vegetable from each of the subgroups throughout the week. And that is a recommendation for us as well. We'll get into more of those subgroups, but know that I believe there is that information in your packet too, so you can see. Those subgroups include red, orange is one, dark green, legumes, starchy, and then like an other category, which is like celery and cucumbers and things like that. Again, you can choose fresh, frozen, canned, and dried options, and also that 100% vegetable juice. The one caveat with that juice is that with like V8 juice or tomato juice, those can often be really high in sodium. So you want to read those nutrition labels. And then you also want to choose options that are lower in like salts and butter or creamy sauces. And 90% of Americans do not meet the recommendations for vegetables. Oh, Lori just asked me, what's a legume? Does anybody know what a legume is? Beans, yes, exactly. Yeah, so that is part of a healthy diet. And it's a very inexpensive protein, high in fiber, and it's a great choice to, you know, add here and there, however you can.
Nutrient dense.
Nutrient dense, that's our key word for today, yes. And high in protein, yes, exactly, that's right. So maybe this is an area you want to kind of look at. And, you know, there was a study recently that said that most, I think, our youth here in Maine are eating less than 1 serving of vegetables a day. So if you're eating 1 and you bump it up to 2, you know, that is definitely going to be beneficial. And French fries is a high one, for sure, yes. And it is, you know, a vegetable, for sure. So again, talking about like those subgroups, the font here is, again, very small. But, you know, those dark greens are like kale, spinach, any kind of lettuce. And we didn't really talk about what a serving size is, but a serving size is like a half a cup. And so, except for leafy greens, which are a cup.
I'm just going to pass this around so people can kind of see. If it's a raw vegetable, 1 full cup counts as a portion. And then if it's a cooked vegetable, 1/2 cup counts as a portion.
Yeah. Those are cucumbers. So red, orange, that's like bell peppers, carrots, tomatoes. I think, you know, we can really, usually tomatoes are a very common thing that we eat, but then those beans, peas, and legumes, lentils, red beans, chickpeas, soybeans, black beans. Starchy, that would be like corn, green peas, potatoes, things like that. The other category is a bit random, so artichokes, asparagus, beets, cauliflower, celery, those are all kind of like the other category. And now getting into grains. So the recommendation was that half of our daily grains come from whole grains, and really limiting more of those refined grains, and we'll talk more about that. And individuals who choose the refined grains, you want to focus on more of the ones that are enriched. So that 2 to 4 cups in a week. If you put a half a cup on your salad or a cup, that's all beneficial, you know, but kind of the target is like that 2 to 4 a day and then a range throughout the week. So it's really not meant to be a, you know, strict diet where you're going to go through and check boxes. You can certainly if you want to, and that's not at all what we're trying to imply with what we're talking about. We're just giving you the information, the evidence-based information, and then hopefully something, maybe a few things will kind of sink in. You'll realize maybe things you want to add to your diet, maybe some little tweaks you want to make, and all of those will be adding to you know, beneficial, health-promoting dietary changes. So back to grains. Half the grains a day would be those whole grains, and then 98% of Americans are falling below the recommendation of 5 to 10 ounces of the whole grains per day. So, and then we're exceeding recommendation of the refined grains. Does anybody know an example of what a refined grain would be, or what a white bread, white pasta, croissants, scones. When you want to know if you're eating a whole grain, you want to look at that nutrition label. The very first ingredient should say whole. If it says whole, then you know it's a whole grain. But oftentimes there will be a lot of breads that are oatmeal bread or 9-grain bread or those types of things. Very often those breads are not whole grains. And so reading that nutrition label, looking for that word whole is really where you're going to be able to identify that it's a whole grain. So again, maybe, yes, question?
Is tofu considered a grain or?
No. Tofu is another one that can kind of cross over on some of those categories. It is a protein, but it is also a legume. So like white flour, that is a refined grain. So if you were eating like, what is it, like 2 ounces, 2 to 4 ounces would be, yeah, about a quarter of a cup dried is kind of like a serving. And by no means does it mean no white flour, no, but you know, like when I make banana bread or when I make muffins, I split the flour. And I use, you know, whole wheat flour and white flour. And the reason why the white flour is, you know, so popular, it's more shelf stable. It adds like a finer texture, so it is palatable. But, you know, what I've noticed in my own diet is as I've added more of the whole grains, I really enjoy them. And so, you know, we transitioned to whole wheat pasta by adding half or even just a little bit, a quarter of whole wheat pasta with, you know, 3/4 of white pasta. And then, you know, increasing that such to the point that now we eat whole wheat pasta and nobody minds in my family and it's just what's in the cupboard. And so there's just little tweaks you can do. Again, like we're talking about, is just adding to the diet.
So then what is the evidence based that the USDA has determined that we should eat 50% of refined grains? Why not 100% of whole grains?
Because whole grains, I mean you could, but whole grains are missing the enriched folate. So there is some advantage to eating some refined grains because of the folate. And by no means should you all leave here and completely change your diet and eat a ton of fiber and you know, not be able to go to the bathroom for, you know, however long, or we don't want that. We're just really, right today, we're not really providing individual information. We're really covering the dietary guidelines. If you do have more specific questions, you can certainly make an appointment to meet with a dietitian, or you know, your primary care provider can help to guide you with some of that too. But this is just an overview of the guidelines. So moving on, we're just going to talk a little bit more about the grain. This is kind of a model of a whole grain. And so what happens in the refining process is we take away that outer bran, and then we take away the inner germ, and we're left with the endosperm. And so, you know, when we take away those components, we lose some B vitamins, we lose fiber, we lose, you know, I'll go into it in more detail on the next slide. But that's basically that refining process. And then it goes through another enrichment process where we add a lot of it back in. So.
Not all of it.
Not all of it, yes.
Some of it.
And the reason why we added that back in is because there were different, you know, health conditions that were showing up, like beriberi, what else was it? Wernicke's encephalopathy, pellagra, scurvy, yeah. So this is kind of an overview of what the difference is and where those vitamins are. And then kind of talking about the fortification process, which is where we add the ingredients back in. And so you'll see here that the whole wheats are higher in vitamin E, higher in B6, higher in magnesium, thiamine higher, riboflavin higher, niacin, and fiber, potassium, iron, folate, protein, all of those are higher in the whole grains. Then the enriched grains are really where we added the folate, the riboflavin, the niacin, the iron, and folate, yeah, thiamine, yeah. Yeah, so that just kind of gives you like an overview of that process.
To your point, here's your natural whole grain, and then here you can see once we refine it, we lose almost all of that, and we're only adding back a couple. So a natural whole grain, you just have so much more right off the bat. So that's why we're always talking whole grains. You've heard me say whole grains, reduce the refined grains.
And we'll get into more detail again in lecture 3. Dr. Fracci will talk more about some of the evidence in lecture 2, and we'll talk more about like how to pick and options and stuff and reading nutrition labels in lecture 3. So now we're moving into dairy and fortified soy. So, we were told as kids to drink milk, and that really should never have changed throughout our lifespan. Milk, I will say, cow milk is a high allergen. So if you do notice that you have like any kind of upset stomach or diarrhea, nausea, things like that when you drink cow milk, there's a chance that you are allergic to it. And they make like a lactate milk, or they make lactate pills that can help with that. Soy is really the most recommended alternative. The benefit of cow milk is the price. It's much cheaper than soy milk, but and then there are other milks that are like plant milks, almond milk, oat milk, rice milk. Those are all available. They aren't really comparable in nutrient density to milk and soy milk. That doesn't mean those aren't, what you prefer, but again, you're going to be losing some of that protein. A lot of those, milk and soy milk are complete. They contain all of the amino acids, and then calcium and things like that. It's more like that fortification process. Yes.
I heard about almond milk, that it pulls away the calcium out of your system, but what about coconut milk?
Coconut milk would fall under the same category. It would be kind of like a milk, or like a milk juice, sort of. That's it's not as nutrient dense as like cow milk or soy milk. Those are, again, dietary guidelines. This is what is recommended with the dietary guidelines. And when you kind of start to look at nutrition labels and start comparing, then you can start to get into what you prefer, because we talked a lot about how the dietary guidelines are meant to meet your own personal preferences, but we're just giving you the evidence. Yeah. So maybe this is an area that you want to improve, adding yogurt, or adding, instead of half and half in your coffee, maybe adding milk and warming the milk in the microwave or something along those lines. Maybe this is an area you could think about. So protein foods. So a healthy dietary pattern includes 5 to 7 ounces of protein a day. Again, adding a variety of protein. So those subgroups are the meat, poultry, and eggs. Another is seafood. Another is nuts, seeds, and soy proteins. And beans, peas, and lentils. Those are all the subgroups. So you want to eat a variety of those subgroups throughout the day. And the meats that we eat, the recommendation is like fresh, frozen, or canned, and in those lean protein forms. So chicken without skin, turkey, fish, those are really kind of more like the leaner proteins. And certainly a vegetarian diet can be a healthy dietary pattern. And then seafood provides those additional beneficial fatty acids, the EPA, the DHA, and it is recommended that you choose options that are lower in mercury. Those are like the ones that are higher on the food chain or lower in the bottom of the ocean. Contrary to what you hear in the media, in all of the kind of diet culture stuff, Americans are exceeding the protein recommendations. Now, again, we're talking about the dietary guidelines. I don't know about each of you individually, because in general, people age 65 and older maybe aren't meeting their protein needs. So really, I can't say for certain that none of you are eating your vegetable recommendations, nor can I say you're not meeting your protein recommendations, but 5 to 7 ounces is kind of where you need to be. There is evidence out there that a high protein diet can help with weight loss. So there is evidence about that, but again, we're not talking about weight loss. We're not talking about individual needs. We're just saying if you're eating 5 to 7 ounces, you are getting the beneficial nutrients that you need for health promotion. Yes, question?
I just thought I would point out that 5 to 7 ounces of protein is equivalent to 142 to 198 grams of protein. So figuring it out by grams might be easier as well.
Right. And our portion sizes are quite distorted. So when you get like a hamburger, a 3 ounce, we don't have that one, but a 3 ounce hamburger is, not very big. But we can get these very large, half pound, quarter pound, burgers, and that's, probably more than we need. And then just on top of that, we are, like we said, the subgroups. We're really eating like a lot of fish or chicken and eggs and beef, and not really meeting the recommendation for like seafood, nuts, seeds, and soy products. And then the other thing with protein is that typically the proteins that we're choosing are often very high in saturated fats, in sodium, and they can sort of add other things to the diet that we'll talk about wanting to limit too. But yeah, questions? Yes.
Eggs.
Eggs.
I do eggs a lot for breakfast.
Yes.
But I do a lot of egg beaters too.
Okay.
If I'm going to have like a sunny side up, it's an egg. But if I do omelets, which I do a couple of times a week, it's egg beaters. Is there one versus the other better for you?
Is Allison still here? She would probably know that. So the question is, are egg beaters better for you than, oh, thank you. This is 3 ounces of ground beef. So the question is whether egg beaters are better for you than eggs. And Allison, are you familiar with egg beaters?
A quarter cup of egg beaters is about what would be considered 1 ounce. So another example of 1 ounce is a 1-inch square or a golf ball. So 2 golf balls worth of egg beaters is roughly that 1 ounce portion. And just incomparable to an egg, when you think about it, the white, a beater is just the white. So there's the yolk and there's the white. So if you're just doing egg beaters, you have to do the equivalent of a yolk in volume plus the white.
But it's lower cholesterol.
Very much so,
yes.
Doesn't have lutein, but it's lower in cholesterol. It's not quite as nutrient dense.
Yeah, so an egg beater would be a good choice, but the recommendation is really, like 5 eggs a week. So we may find with the dietary guidelines that come out in 2025 that there's more information about inflammatory diets. The question was, but what foods to eat for inflammation, and so really following the dietary guidelines, if you're following these, that is health promotion and can be beneficial with inflammation. Like certainly increasing fruits and vegetables is a benefit, and decreasing those enriched grains are kind of like the general. And then focusing on like olive oil and things like that, canola oil, vegetable oil, yeah.
And some non-fish food sources, if she didn't bring it up, some non-fish food sources of omega-3s are walnuts, wheat germ, and nuts and seeds in general.
Yes. So beverages. So when choosing your beverages, you want to look at the calories and that nutrient density, as those are important considerations when you choose your beverages. Beverages that are calorie-free, like water, or that contribute beneficial nutrients, like fat-free and low-fat milk, 100% juice, and those really should be what we're choosing for our beverages. Coffee, tea, and flavored water, those are great options. And you want to choose the nutrient-dense forms and limit the added sugar and the added saturated fat. Sugar-sweetened beverages should be limited. You all know this. This is not new information. You've heard this a million times. And then adequate daily fluid intake is important for hydration and to help with regularity. So now we have an activity. It's a rethink your drink matching game. What do you guys think a cafe latte with fat-free milk? How many calories do you think is in that?
Probably 430.
125, yes. Now, hands up if you think this would be a nutrient-dense choice. Yes, it is. That is fat-free milk, and it would be a fine option. Now I'm going to ask you, how many calories do you think is in a frozen caramel coffee drink with whipped cream?
430.
Yes, 430. So hands up if you think that's a nutrient-dense choice. No, that would be adding those saturated fats and sugar that we try to limit. What about apple juice? How many calories do you think are in apple juice? Yeah, like 160, 192, thereabouts. How about nutrient density? It's 100% apple juice. There's a big clue. Do you think that's a good choice? Yes, it is a good choice for some people. For maybe people with diabetes, maybe limiting juice is a better option. But that's just kind of an example of a way that you can get a fruit serving. Water, that's an easy one. How many calories are in water? 0, yeah, exactly. So the idea of this activity is not to really point out calories, because calories aren't really good or bad. They're just a source of energy. The point here is just to kind of think about, how they're adding to your diet. What are they contributing? Are they contributing the added sugars? Are they, are they nutrient dense? Could you use them and add more beverages to your diet that would be, beneficial? So that's kind of what that activity is for. Any questions? Yes.
What about drinking soy milk?
The question is, what about drinking soy milk? You'd have to read the nutrition label specifically. If you look at like a vanilla soy milk, that would be sweetened. And then there's also an unsweetened version. So that would really mean looking at the nutrition label. But a soy milk is a good dairy option, fortified soy milk. Yeah. So moving on. So components of foods and beverages to limit. So added sugars, that's not new information. Everybody's heard that. And saturated fat, that's another one. Does anybody know kind of where we get saturated fat? Butter, yep. Yeah, chicken skin, the fat and marbling in like your beef. Yeah, pardon?
Skin.
Yes, the skin on poultry, that's a source of saturated fat. So those are kind of what we want to limit. Margarine is also a source of saturated fat.
I feel like the better types of spreads are ones where they blend olive oil or vegetable oil in, not just frank straight butter. And there's misconception that tub margarine is plastic. That's not really true. You're better off to get something that's all natural and that's soft. If it's spreadable, it has less saturated fat. And avoid any stick margarine because that definitely has a lot of saturated fat.
And the trans fat.
And the trans fat,
Yeah,
which is
hydrogen.
definitely,
Yeah.
they call it a diopesogenic.
Yes.
By margarine, do you guys mean things like Earth Balance and Yogos and some of those new alternative
Yes.
non-butters?
You're going to want to read the nutrition label because like there is one Earth Balance that doesn't have trans fats in it, or it's low in saturated fat, and then there's some that have it. So like palm oil, you want to avoid palm oil. That is, if you see that in your products, that's a source of trans and saturated fat.
Yes. I agree. There's palm kernel oil and there's palm oil, and then there's palm fruit oil. And when they first came out with Earth Balance, it was palm fruit oil specifically. And now I'm reading the label and I'm just seeing palm oil, which means it's a blend of the palm kernel, which is the saturated fat that Lexi was just saying.
And then sodium. So really, a lot of people can go to the doctor and the doctor can say you need to limit your sodium to 2,300 milligrams a day. Guess what? We all should be limiting our sodium to 2,300 milligrams. And that is 1 teaspoon. So if you aren't using salt at the table, that's great. But then, again, you want to read those nutrition labels to see where you're getting that sodium from. And then alcohol. So the alcohol is definitely not part of the nutrient-dense foods. It's not part of a healthy diet, but it's something that we can enjoy, but really in moderation. And there's certainly some people who shouldn't drink it at all, like pregnant women. And so the guidelines say that 2 drinks for men a day and 1 drink for women a day is really kind of where, that's that or less. You want to limit it to that. And a drink is considered a 6-ounce glass of wine, an 8-ounce beer, or a shot of that harder alcohol. That's considered a serving size. So the nutrients of concern or underconsumption, that is kind of in general based on the evidence, what they looked at, and that is including calcium, potassium, dietary fiber, and vitamin D. And those are considered of a nutrient, a public health concern, those nutrients. If you are consuming the dietary guidelines, if you are following the dietary guidelines, you're meeting all of those nutrients. So there's no need to supplement, really, unless you see some sort of deficiency. But that's what the guidelines point out, with the exception of vitamin D here in New England. So vitamin D is ingested. We eat foods that have vitamin D, and then we also synthesize it through our skin. And we live in New England. We don't get outside in t-shirts and shorts very often, and so that can be a nutrient of concern. If you feel as though you're wondering, then definitely talk to your primary care provider to be tested about that, because it's not a given that you're deficient, for sure. Yes?
Does wearing sunscreen prevent you from integrating vitamin D?
Yes, it does impact that to some degree as well. Dr. Fracci could maybe.
I can talk for a second.
Yeah.
So yeah, in Maine, it's actually an angle of the sun, and it's UVB, the same stuff that gives us cancer, also gives us vitamin D. So really from September, October until March, even if you sunbathed in the winter, which we would not do, you could not get enough vitamin D. So we are not getting enough vitamin D through the winter months. And there's not a lot of foods that has a lot of vitamin D, so most of us become deficient. Now, luckily, it is a fat-soluble vitamin. So if you store up your stores in the summer, there are many people who get through the winter and don't become deficient. But if you're already kind of borderline, it is easy to dip. So if you've seen me in my clinic and you ask me this question, I don't always bring it up for everybody. I say, yeah, it's not a bad idea to take 400 international units through the winter months if you're worried. And that'll probably cover you. And then there's a couple conditions. I've got a few people on mega doses for absorption issues, but that's a different story.
Okay, so we kind of went over those nutrients of underconsumption. And now kind of talking about the guidelines. So 85% of your total daily calories are needed to meet the dietary guidelines. So the good news is that leaves about 15% for kind of your, interpretation, or like, foods that maybe fall outside of that. But that 15% is about 250 to 300 calories. So there's room. It doesn't mean no ice cream. It doesn't mean, no croissants or whatever it is that, kind of maybe are outside, but it's not a lot. And physical activity. And then after this, we'll kind of get up and wiggle around a bit, and we have some more activities after this. But the recommendations by the CDC is a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate to intense physical activity every day. And what determines moderate to intense is based on your individual body. So it doesn't mean everybody should be running marathons by any means. Like chair yoga or different types of things can be what's best for you. I can't say that for your individual, and I'm not a physical therapist. So, and then the recommendation is 2 to 3 days a week of strength training. So that can also be very beneficial. Did I say 150 minutes a day? Oh, wow. No, we would not be in here. We would all be outside doing this running. No, sorry, a week, which works out to about 20 minutes a day. So sorry, thank you, Lori. No, but yeah, and then, yeah. So that kind of wraps up the dietary guidelines. It's a lot of information. Again, it's just meant to be very general. It's not individualized. So you really you would be, know that better. And SMART goals are specific. Oh my gosh, we have SMART there on the handout. It's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So a SMART goal wouldn't be, I want to exercise more. A SMART goal would be, I am going to walk to my mailbox 3 times a week this week. That would be a SMART goal. So if you feel inclined, please go ahead and add some goals for yourself.
And this would be a good time for you to bring your plate back out if you wanted to refer back to that. And now, based on the information that you've learned from Lexi, if you decide that you want to make some goals, you could look at your plate and see maybe what are the places where you could add some or take something away. So if you want to do that, that's, you can definitely use the plate that you artistically created.
And then maybe get up and move around.
And then you can feel free to get up and move around. Allison's going to be coming up in a minute or so and starting on the food demos.
When you combine fruits and vegetables, it has 3 times the benefits, like the nutritional density skyrockets. So whenever you're preparing a food, try to think of ways to incorporate 2 different items at the same time that's a whole food, because you'll get triple the nutritional values from those things. The American Institute for Cancer Research.org has a wonderful article explaining that, say for example, blueberries have this much of an ability to fight cancer, and a banana has this much ability to fight cancer, but when you put the banana and the blueberries together, then you have triple the anti-cancer effect of those foods. So blend your foods, have a variety, have color. Lori brought up a really great idea of how to do dates if you wanted to add dates to a trail mix. So I'm going to show everybody how to do that. So these were pitted dates that I got at Hannaford's, Shaw's in Bath. Medjool, so they're pitless. And I just think it's kind of fun. So anyway, if people haven't tried that already and they've got kitchen scissors, go for it, because it's quicker sometimes than having to take a bunch of these things and chop them all up. Or if you're just doing like a small batch for, say, your yogurt in the morning, that's a nice, easy way, and you don't have to take out a big knife and all that stuff. Oh, and before any food prep, I would encourage hand washing, obviously. I think food sanitation is huge, and there's really not enough discussion around it. We got talking about vitamins and minerals and all these details, and we realized that, oh, if we could just wash our hands more often, we would help prevent disease. So, which one should I start with, the kale chips? Or, okay, kale chips it is. So you take out the hard part. The recipe in your reference talks about cooking it at 325 or 350, I think. When I've made my own kale chips at home, I turn the temperature to 400, and I do it for a shorter length of time. And I sit right there with them because they will burn, and they will burn fast. So you want to be careful too, if you're going to cook them quicker and higher so that they're a little bit crispier, potentially. Although these, Emily explained that they came out really crispy, and I can hear as people are eating them, they're just as crispy. They'll take a little bit longer to cook, but at 325.
Extremely salty.
All right, is there salt on the kale chips? There's a little bit of salt. Oh, someone's saying a lot. Okay.
Whoops. In your booklet, you'll see a variety of ways that you can make your kale chips. The way I make them is I think I put a dash of salt in, but I certainly don't do a half a teaspoon because I don't need it because, I mean, looking at all of these seasonings, there's cumin out there, there's garlic powder out there.
It's a pound to a half teaspoon.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So a whole pound, which is, that's a good question. I don't know if this is, how much is this?
This is probably like 3 pounds.
I would guess that a pound is that much. Yeah, that's about a pound as the recipe goes. So in case you're curious how much.
Probably about 2 bunches at least, right?
Yep, and you can always, you can start with a smaller amount and see how they come out for you. So you'll be pleasantly surprised, I think. And if you're really craving potato chips, I just find them as a really great go-to instead. I like them equally as well as potato chips. So.
And something you can do if you buy kale and have leftover, if you just need a little bit to put in your soup or you're putting, making a salad and then you have leftover, you could always use that for like the kale chips.
So after you've cut up a full pound instead of just this demo, I don't know where the camera's going, but yeah. Then you're going to put in 1 tablespoon of the virgin olive oil, and I didn't bring measuring tools because, again, when I make them at home, I just kind of go like this, and I wait for it to look like it's about right. And then the half teaspoon of salt. I brought, no, I didn't, but I've got kosher salt, and I have read an article that explained kosher salt is 40% lower in sodium. So it's not fact-checked, though, so don't quote me, but.
I just want to make sure everybody's aware that the demo that Allison doing is not a full pound of kale. So even though the recipe says a half teaspoon of of salt, that is not what you would put a half teaspoon on right there.
Okay, so one thing you should do when you get your seasonings onto the kale chips, and I'm not following the recipe, I'm just sprinkling a little bit in because I like the taste of garlic powder, I like the taste of cumin, and then I might just do a dash of the salt because they taste so good without the, full half teaspoon as long as you're using other seasonings. And then you just knead it. So it means to knead kale is just to squish it with your hands. One other thing that we're going to be doing, and this does soften it, which really fascinates me. The other thing about kale, not so much the way we're preparing it right here, is that if you blend it in a salad with raisins and sunflower seeds, then it's not so tough. I mean, when I eat just kale by itself in a salad, I think, this is too tough, it's too hard to chew. But if I've been offered it in a salad that also has something that's harder to chew, such as raisins and sunflower seeds, then it doesn't seem so, hard to chew. But where we chew our food, we're secreting amylase, and we need to do that. So I really do want people to remember this part of the lecture too, is that we need to chew our food thoroughly. Chewing sets off satiety signals in the brain. It allows all the surfaces of that food to be exposed to amylase. Then it can be digested once it gets down to the stomach. So anyway.
Amylase is an enzyme, and it helps to break it down. Now we're getting very specific.
Sorry. All right. So then what you do is you put this on a cookie sheet. And we realized this is going to take a long time with the paprika, with the kale chips. But while I'm making the kale chips, we could preheat the oven just so you can see the color that they come out when we actually, I can hold it up to the camera. So if somebody wants to preheat the oven, and then just keep an eye on them because they will cook fast. Yeah, so I'll also show people other things that they could put on popcorn. This is called brewer's yeast, so I'll put it down
That's
on the
nutritional yeast.
nutritional yeast. Yes,
It's called nutritional yeast.
Yeah, and it tastes like cheese. So if you're somebody who can't digest cheese, it gives foods a cheesy flavor, which is nice. And
Rich in B vitamins too.
right, exactly, rich in B vitamins. This is the toasted paprika chickpeas.
We just have about 6 minutes, so we're going to be kind of quick about this next.
Okay. And you guys all have the recipes and so forth, so I'm going to, again, kind of wing it for the proportion, but it's going to be 1 small can, which is 14 ounces, so that winds up being about 2 cups, a cup and a half of the chickpeas. And then the next ingredient is 4 teaspoons of olive oil. So I brought in the 100% olive oil. I have read that the Bertolini and some of the other brands of olive oil are a blend of oils, not 100% real olive oil. So I do encourage people to spend a little more and get olive oil that they see as 100% olives in the ingredients. So you go back to your ingredient list. I don't know where the camera's held it up, but Lexi's going to talk about labels in the future and answer people's questions about which types of oils are good for us. All right, and then 1/4 teaspoon of paprika. I like to get my spices, sometimes I'll get them in bulk from Penzi because they're nice and fresh, and but you obviously can just pick them up at Shaw's and Hannaford's. So the paprika was just 1/2 teaspoon.
Or to taste.
And I like smoked paprika. That's a really tasty flavor for me. So I'll look for that too sometimes when I'm shopping or if I order stuff in bulk. The salt was 1/4 teaspoon. So sometimes I will just use the palm of my hand and then sprinkle it in.
And good idea to put the oil in like a measuring cup and not dumping it right in, and put the salt in your hand so you can see how much you're putting in.
Good idea. And then garlic powder. So there we go, garlic powder, and that one was 1/4 teaspoon again. So about 1/4 teaspoon. And then the next one was cumin. So cumin is like Mexican spicing, but it's not hot. So if you're somebody who doesn't like spicy, like it's too hot, it's going to burn your tongue kind of feeling, your sensation as it's being digested too. Anyway, spicy can sometimes not be well tolerated, but cumin isn't spicy. It's just a Mexican. It's just a very good mild flavor. And it's full of, again, all these compounds that help fight cancer. When we studied about how do we create medications, oftentimes we'll be studying, someone else asked about inflammation. We study, well, what is turmeric doing? And we're seeing, hey, it's helping bring down these inflammatory markers. And back to that comment too, we mentioned that sugar, I wanted to mention that sugar causes inflammation, and added sugar, and that the average American is now consuming something like 10 times the amount of sugar than they were, back in the 40s or something, before we got to all of these refined processed foods. And then the black pepper. And I would measure it if I had, the measuring tools. Next time we'll get a little bit spiffier.
And a dash of cayenne.
And then a dash of cayenne.
That's going to be the hot.
Yeah, so if you're not a hot fan, then just do a little cumin. If you're
cayenne.
If you are a hot fan, then do a little extra dash of the cayenne. All right, so then that would be mixed, and then it would be put onto a cookie sheet, and because we have it all prepped ahead to save time, this one winds up taking about a half an hour, because you have to toss them after about 15 minutes of cooking, and then you finish them off for another 15 minutes. But we can all taste them together here today.
What did you guys think of the kale chips and the chickpea?
Did they taste good?
Thumbs up? Maybe?
With less salt.
Yes, maybe less salt. Sorry about that. That came from the kitchen, and so maybe they didn't see the directions about. So sorry about that.
This was a nutrition class, right? Whoops. Maybe it was good just to remind us all to pay attention and think about that.
It was a test, actually, to see if you could tell. Because if you could tell that they were really salty, then clearly you're doing a good job. So
We do have some extras there and out there. If you want a little.
You talk about salt and iodine. What's the difference between regular, like Morton table salt, iodized table salt, and sea salt?
So the question is, what's the difference between iodized salt and sea salt? And do you, I mean,
Like I said,
we
sea salt has more minerals, a different mineral profile than the salt that you get from iodized salt. Yeah.
Again, like the sea salt's probably processed a little bit less. Iodine, since we started adding it to salt, is not a nutrient of concern. But if we maybe stopped consuming iodized salt, it could be, but that's to be determined, really. Yeah.
And we could bring back goiter, because I do remember goiter. I'm old enough to remember seeing men and women that would have these bulges on their neck, and that's why the USDA stepped in and said, hey, let's add a little bit of iodine to salt so that people who are not fish eaters and can't get access to a balanced diet will help stop that disease from occurring, and it did. I never see anybody with goiter anymore.
I choose iodized salt.
I do too. Yeah, and just also to kind of stay tuned, I hope that people are excited to see our follow-ups, because there's going to be definitely stuff about the digestive tract, stuff about label reading that will still build on everything that we're talking about here to help hopefully make the case for improving, maybe not the entire USDA population, but in our little group, we're going to have people that are eating similarly to the blue zones and some of the other places that where the disease rates are much lower, where the incidence of longevity is higher. So I really am hopeful that people realize that it's not as complicated as some special vitamin or mineral supplement. It really isn't. It's more about just basic whole foods and trying to eat a variety of foods from all the food groups, remembering that plate method, which is a much easier way than the food pyramid, where you're trying to do half your plate on starchy vegetables, a quarter of it barley or whole wheat bread or some spaghetti, and then a quarter of it protein, like an egg or some fish, so that we can improve our little area of the world.
We are here at the 6:32 mark, so if you all are ready to go, please feel free. Thank you so much for coming.
Please come back.